everyone, welcome to this tutorial. Today we're going to have a look at creating our own end tag, and that is a animated sting. In this case we're looking at this Doritos one here, and we're going to try and emulate this one to the best of our ability, and also time constraints and also software constraints in Photoshop. And here's a little video, I'm just sliding through it there. And typically we would usually do this in other software besides Photoshop, things like After Effects for example, where we can create our own particles and things like that. But in a pinch we can get relatively close using Photoshop. It has a lot of powerful tools and also animation tools that we might be able to use. So in this case we're going to do it entirely in Photoshop and see how we can get away with doing that. So first things first, let's jump into it. Let's create a document that we're going to use. So a couple of ways of doing this. We have the MP4 video here that we're going to use as a reference, and we're going to build our own based on the assets that I will supply. And simply what we could do is just right click on this and go to open with. If you do not see Photoshop here, and obviously if you've got Photoshop installed on your computer, you can simply go to other and then track it down in here. And there's a number of ways of opening this as well. If you have Photoshop already in your dock like I do here, you could literally drag that in and place it on there, and that will open it in Photoshop as well. So there's two options there. Another way is to open Photoshop, and let's just get that so I can actually bring both of these together, and I'm going to literally drag that onto my workspace, and that will also open that up in Photoshop, as you can see there. The other way is to go to File and Open, and then of course track that down wherever you've got it saved and open that. So all of these ways will work in opening that asset in Photoshop. So whatever works, open it up. Now it is important to recognize that when we do open that video asset in Photoshop, it is going to be the same size as the asset, so it's going to have the same frame rate. So for example, 24 frames per second. If I go to image size, it's going to tell me that it is 1280 pixels by 720 pixels at 72 pixels per inch. Now if that works for you for your production, or if it's going to be for a TVC or whatever, fantastic. If not, if you need to build your own document that's going to be a different size, I recommend doing that straight off the bat and going to something like File, New, and then maybe going to Film and Video and checking to see if you can find a preset that's already pre-built, or check with whoever's in charge of making sure that your aspect ratios and resolutions are correct, and go with that. So let's say for example we're going to go, let's go with Cinean, let's go film 4K, no, let's go Cinean half, just for example, or 4K, and hit create. And kind of a weird aspect ratio there, but if that is what you need to build it in, then great. And then simply drag and place your end tag into that document, and you may wish to scale it at this point. And as you can see, the aspect ratio is very different, but that is going to start us out. And then hit create video timeline, and there we have our little video in there, and frame rate, aspect ratio, all that is going to be in there. But in this case I'm not going to go with that. I'm simply going to just open that with Photoshop, and as you can see my timeline is there. If you do not see your timeline there, just remember to go to Window and make sure timeline is ticked on, and there we have it there. And it's going to make sure that we can see our video assets as we bring them. By the way, if you don't have your workspace nice and clean, please do. It is going to get rather cluttered with your timelines, so keep it down to layers at this point. Colors you probably even don't need to have straight away, but I usually like to keep it up there in case of emergencies. Couple other things to look at. If you've opened this up, and as I said, it is currently 24 frames per second. If your your film or whatever you're going to be placing this into is a different frame rate, please do that before you start doing anything too drastic. There's a little menu in the timeline here, click on that and go to set timeline frame rate. This little box will pop up here and you can manually type in the frame rate that you want, or you can go to some of the preset selections, so 25 frames per second, and hit OK. And that way it's going to be easier for it to sync up afterwards. Okay, a couple other things as well. As you might know, if you're following along with this, that your timeline might look slightly different in the sense that this might be thicker here. Please just go to the menu again and go to panel options, bring that up, and you may wish to drop your thumbnail size down to none. So I think by default it's usually around here somewhere, and it's quite thicker and it's got a little image, which is great. But if we're going to have a whole lot of these, we really want to maximize what we can do in our workspace. So panel option, and I usually recommend going to none. Don't forget, you can move your timeline up and down like so. You just need to go to this little half line here on the top of the timeline panel, and you can also undock this and place it pretty much anywhere you like. So it's completely up to you. If you've got dual monitors, that could be handy, or you can redock it, as I'm going to do, right down the bottom, because I think it's a pretty handy place for it to be. You can zoom in and out on your timeline here, and of course this is going to allow us to scrub across. Over here on the bottom, sort of central area here, you can actually see the time code for there. So if I scrub to the end, you can see we're at 2 seconds and 15 frames based on 25 frames per second. You can always double click on that. This will bring up your current time indicator, and you can change to a particular time. So if you wanted to go to exactly 1 second, I can type in 1 and then 00 frames, and that's going to bring my playhead to that point. Cool, so this is going to be our reference, and we're going to try and build this up. Now, I've actually built some assets already for this, and these are in Photoshop PSD, and there's the preview for it. So I'm actually going to open that up in Photoshop on a separate document. So here it is here. No timeline, we don't need a timeline for that. There's 3 elements that I've done for the bold, Doritos, and the triangle. Now I've actually built this with a mask on it. I'm just going to apply that mask. So I'm going to right click on that mask and go apply layer mask. Just something I should have done earlier, but there it is there. There's my 3 assets, and I'm going to press shift and then select all 3 of these. So click on the bottom, press shift, click the top one. All of these are selected, and I'm going to go Command C to copy. You can also go to edit and copy, so Command or Control C if you're on Mac or PC, and then click back into my document. Now there's a few things you need to be aware of. That is, 1, wherever your playhead is, if you paste Command V, it is going to build it from that playhead. The other thing as well is, because this starts off as a video, it's going to be in a video group. You can see over here in the layer panel, which means that if I paste, it's going to place every layer one after the other in a row. Now that can be really useful, but in our case we want everything stacked on top of each other, so I'm going to undo that, Command or Control Z, and I'm going to click on the video group folder itself. So I'm going to paste this again. I'm going to paste it, and it's going to go on top of this layer. You can move these after the fact, but it's easier just to do this way. So I'm going to move my playhead to the beginning. And the reason for that is, if I don't paste, the layers are going to be placed wherever that playhead is. Now again, you can move those, but just to save me a few little easy moves, move it to the front and jump to the top of there, and V, Command V, Control V, and paste them in there. And now those layers, as you can see, are going to be put into my document. Now the other thing to remember, every time you create a layer or you import a layer or whatever it is, it's going to be by default 5 seconds long. So if we go to the end here, 4 seconds and 24 frames based on 25 frames per second, which means that final frame is actually the end of the shot, which is exactly 5 seconds. So we may need to trim that down. If you press shift and scrub across, it will lock it into the end of the previous one. You just go to end of each layer and drag those down to be exactly the duration of this shot. So there they are there. What we're going to do is we're going to look at these assets and we're going to animate them. It's going to be very, very simple animation, but we're going to animate them, and then we're going to look at masking off and gradually revealing this. So if we look at our actual assets for our video, we have the Doritos for the bold appearing out of the darkness. We've got the triangle gradually forming with sparks and lightning and that kind of thing, and glows. And then we've also got a lot of particle effects and also a vignette display and a little bit of cloud happening in the background. So let's have a look at just animating the text first, and then we'll look at moving the triangle.